What went wrong with polls? It's the ever-present question. And some of the people who got it most wrong are beginning to grapple with it with some pretty interesting ideas. This is over from the New York Times' Nate Cohn. So what went wrong? You can see just exactly in that table the distribution of exactly how wrong things were in 2020. So the final polling average in the U.S., and if you look at it with 2016 error, it was like +6 across the entire United States, +5 for Biden. I mean, a 5-point underperformance for Joe Biden in the national polls is just stunning. And look at how it evaluates itself down ballot. I mean, in New Hampshire, in Minnesota, in Nebraska, in the Nebraska 2nd District, for Trump in Ohio and Iowa and Texas, and overperformance in Maine and in Florida. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. And Krystal, my favorite theory so far within there is from David Shore. He's no Democratic pollster, really fascinating guy. Is he says the basic story is that after lockdown, Democrats just started taking surveys because they were locked at home and didn't have anything else to do. Nearly all of the national polling error can be explained by the post-COVID jump in response rates amongst Dems. How incredible is that? He's basically saying Dems stayed at home, started doing a bunch of surveys, Republicans were like largely working or like not taking it as seriously, and so that entire dynamic explains the polling miss. Maybe he's right. I buy it.
I think there's some data to back this up too, and this is something Nate Cohn also sort of bought into, this idea of essentially what happened is during the pandemic, you had a bunch of resistance libs, like college-educated resistance libs, who answered every poll survey that came their way.
Of course they would, right?
And so what did the pollsters correct for this time that gave them such confidence that, like, oh, we're not going to have a 2016 repeat?
Yes.
Because this time we've corrected for the college-educated split, the college, non-college split. But the problem was, and the area where the polls ended up being the most off, it looks like, was actually among college-educated voters. So it would make sense that within that demographic, in particular of white, college-educated voters, if their cohort was overwhelmingly resistance libs, and they were missing what ended up being the shy Trump voter, which is like the white college-educated
women.
Trump voter appears to have been the one that wasn't responding to the polls or was lying to the pollsters or whatever. But I think that the idea that it was a bunch of resistance libs super excited about the election, responding to every poll that threw everything off, is fascinating and has a lot of potential veracity to it.
Here's another huge miss. There's no evidence, zero, that the president fared worse in coronavirus hotspots, contrary to the expectations of pundits, studies, and polling at the time. I think that is one of the biggest things that we have to remember. I mean, Trump lost Wisconsin by 20,000 votes. 20,000. That had the worst cases in the country on election day. People didn't care. And I think that's just something that I have to majorly adjust my expectations on. It's a huge takeaway for me in terms of what people prioritize much in their life. And the fascinating thing, too, is that for all of the dumping by Nate Silver and Nate Cohn, frankly, about shy Trump voters and all of that is true. I mean, the shy Trump effect dramatically was true amongst college-educated women, amongst, Latinos, and I think especially they see amongst suburban whites who, all their neighbors despise Trump. They might have a Biden sign and secretly, they voted for Trump. They're not even necessarily going to admit it. It really goes to show, I think, that there are two things going on. Obviously, as we said here so many times, if there was ever going to be a massive miss, it's going to be lockdown. You're never going to have a bunch of resistance libs locked in their house ever again. So maybe the next polls will be correct, although,
they don't have a great track record.
I'm going to be...
There'll be another reason.
But yeah, there's always going to be a reason. But the main thing to me is, I think as politics begin to shift, it's just going to get too hard to poll. I don't think Bernie can be polled. I don't think Trump can be polled, because the more you shift along right-left axes and traditional things in American politics, the harder it gets for these industries. That's why Obama was easy to poll. Romney was easy to poll. But I don't think these future candidates are going to be that way.
Although Obama in 2012, they predicted the direction of the win, which they did here. They predicted Biden was going to win. Biden did win the national popular vote. They were ultimately off by about 3 points. But the difference between an 8-point win and what looks like it's going to be about a 5-point national popular vote win, it makes a huge difference in terms of whether you're looking at a relatively narrow margin or more of a landslide victory. So they were even off at the Obama era too. It's just there's more uncertainty. It's harder to reach people on their cell phones.
Yeah.
You have, with this polarization, you get this effect of people feeling really nervous about being upfront about the way that they feel. So it appears that you had a few things. You had the resistance lib being super excited to answer the polls phenomenon. You had what turned out to be the shy Trump voter was a little different than what people thought.
Yes.
Like the conception of the shy Trump voter was like the white working class person who maybe is an infrequent voter or for whatever reason doesn't tell the truth. It was actually looks to have been more white college educated people who swim in circles where their peers are overwhelmingly Biden supporters, overwhelmingly liberal. And so that's why they feel, and there's data to back this up, they feel reluctant to share their political views because it's out of step with a lot of their peer group.
As someone who lives in one of those neighborhoods,
I get it. And then the last piece, I think with the Latino voters, which we should say, look, we covered here, the polls were picking up that Donald Trump had made significant gains with Latinos that were going to be important in states like Florida and Texas, something that we covered here extensively. But they undershot just how much of a gain he ultimately made. Yep. I think with that group, it appears that there was a different phenomenon, not of shy Trump voters, but of it being difficult to reach this demographic in sufficient numbers. Like, I don't think that they were polling people who showed up. Joe Biden got, in the Rio Grande Valley, got the same raw vote numbers in these majority Latino districts and counties as Hillary Clinton, but there was this huge surge for Trump, and I don't think that was captured by the polls because they're infrequent voters, so you don't know that they're going to turn out.
Look, elections are already infrequent, and then you have infrequent voters in presidential elections. Very hard to poll. Like I said, the more you have a candidate like Bernie or Trump, it's just going to get too hard. I mean, imagine if Bernie had been on the ballot. I mean, how many people would have voted in the system that had never voted before? That's what happened with Trump in 2016. You had these millions of people who hadn't voted since like Ronald Reagan who came out to vote. So the more that politics begins to trend this way, by the way, I think this is a good thing. The harder it's going to get to poll, and I guess we all learned a lesson here.
There you go. All right, more rising for you after this.